You've seen them before, on the screen, at the edge of town, and in your nightmares. An old Victorian mansion, once elegant and full of life, now stands hollow and forgotten, its tower piercing the night sky as its windows watch silently. When we picture a haunted house, it's almost always a Victorian, a relic of beauty turned to dread. But how did this happen? How did a style born from progress and prosperity become the face of fear? Tonight, we'll open the door to the past, to an age of invention, ambition, and the slow decay that followed. This is the architecture of haunted houses. When we talk about Victorian houses, we're not describing a single style, but rather an era. The era of Queen Victoria in England from 1837 to 1901 was one of great transformation. Industrialization reshaped how the world built. The balloon frame technique was pioneered during this time, using a lightweight skeleton of mass-produced lumber, replacing heavy timber construction. It allowed houses to grow taller and more complex with turrets, bays, and irregular roof lines that would have been near impossible a generation earlier. At the same time, factories revolutionized ornament. Decorative brackets, window trims, and spindles that once required skilled craftspeople could now be stamped, cast, or cut by machines. By the late 1800s, even modest houses could wear the finery once reserved for the elites. And with the rise of pattern books by architects like Alexander Jackson Davis and Andrew Jackson Downing, homeowners could choose from a library of plans and styles. Gothic Revival cottages, Queen Anne villas, or stately Second Empire mansions. Later, catalog companies like Sears, Montgomery Ward, and Aladdin Homes sold either house plans or an entire house that was cut and ready to be assembled. The result was a growing architectural landscape bursting with variety. Streets became forests of gables, towers, and ornament, and it was a time of optimism and ambition, but also one of visual excess. While industrialization changed the way people built, a wave of spiritualism took over Victorian society in Europe and America. This and architecture would provide the perfect foundation for the macabre mansions of our imagination. Of the many Victorian styles that dominated the era, three stand out: Gothic Revival, Queen Anne, and Second Empire. Though Gothic Revival's origins predate the Victorian era, going back to the 1700s with the likes of Horace Walpole, its popularity certainly grew during the period from the 1840s to the 1870s. It began as a romantic look toward medieval architecture and a rejection of industrialization. Early advocates included Alexander Jackson Davis. His design for the Rothbone Estate in Albany, New York from 1840 would serve as inspiration for the Walt Disney World version of the Haunted Mansion attraction, with its stone facade, pointed gables, and a central tower that loomed over the landscape. But as the style shifted to fit budgets and local materials, Gothic Revival began using wood. By the 1870s, the Gothic Revival's somber tones gave way to something livelier, the Queen Anne style. Its asymmetrical facades, mixture of various detailing, and corner towers made for a bold new style. Despite the name, it didn't come from Queen Anne's time at all. The term was coined by the architect Richard Norman Shaw as a picturesque blend of medieval and classical motifs. In America, the style expanded to be more expressive, with chaotic massing. Like this one, this is the Crosby House, which featured a room that cantilevers over a bay window. Of the countless interesting examples of the style, the most influential to the definition of the haunted house would be houses like the Carson Mansion and the Winchester Mystery House. Built in 1885, its sharp angles and looming silhouette made it a perfect backdrop for the first edition cover of Stephen King's novel The Shining, even though the novel's setting was inspired by the Stanley Hotel in Colorado. The Winchester Mystery House was much stranger, with its labyrinth of rooms and strange features like doors that open to nowhere and stairs leading to the ceiling. Its attack its owner, Sarah Winchester, used to trick bad spirits. The house was perpetually under construction, with new expansions, another ploy by Winchester to keep her alive, fearing that once construction stopped, death would come for her. The result is a curious, sprawling mansion that would inspire stories like the novel The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson though its 1963 film version would feature a Gothic Revival house. The final, and probably most identifiable, with the idea of a haunted house is the Second Empire style. Beginning in the 1850s to the late 1880s, the Second Empire style was seen as a modern and sophisticated approach in home design, inspired by the opulent Parisian buildings during the reign of Napoleon III. These homes feature the mansard roof, allowing for a full extra story of living space beneath its steeply sloped sides. Second Empire homes projected urban elegance and ambition. When the style made it to America, after being popularized in France and England, it became the go-to for residential architecture. The style was often married with touches of Italianate architecture, which brought more details around the windows, and Gothic Revival, which saw sharper angles on dormers and cornices. Of the most prominent Second Empire houses that would later inspire the haunted houses of today, it's the S.K. Pierce Mansion in Gardner, Massachusetts. Its dark shades of gray and red and its imposing facade made it eerie enough, but the series of unfortunate events that took place following the house's completion have given it the reputation as a real haunted house. Pierce's wife died of an illness within weeks of moving into the house. After Pierce and his second wife died years later, the mansion was turned into a boarding house, where it gained the reputation for seedy activities. Rumors swirled in the town of a prostitute being strangled in one of the rooms and a child drowning in its basement. A similar number of eerie stories swirl around other mansions of the style, like the Bruce Mansion. This growing sense of uneasiness with these kinds of houses was depicted in the painting by Edward Hopper in 1925 called House by the Railroad, which was based on a real house built in 1885 in Haverstraw, New York. The house was one of thousands that dotted the American landscape, and the images of these houses sitting beside themselves served as inspiration for the stripped-down mansion that looms over the Bates Motel in Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho, which was also inspired by the Second Empire buildings built in places like Virginia City, and serves as the home for the macabre Addams family created by Charles Addams. By the turn of the 20th century, the excess and ornament of Victorian design began to feel outdated, too fussy, too artificial for a new, modern age. The arts and crafts movement, led by figures like William Morris, championed simplicity, honesty in materials, and handcrafted details. As fortunes changed and cities expanded, entire neighborhoods of Victorian houses began to decay. A haunting display of this transformation was in Los Angeles' Bunker Hill neighborhood. In the late 1800s, it was once lined with grand Victorian mansions owned by the city's wealthiest families, with towers and porches that overlooked downtown. But by the 1930s, the area had fallen into decline. The wealthy moved westward, and the ornate mansions were subdivided into cramped boarding houses. The grandeur faded, replaced by peeling paint and sagging roofs. In film noir classics like Kiss Me Deadly and Crisscross, Bunker Hill became the cinematic shorthand for urban decay. By the 1960s, the crumbling Victorian silhouettes were soon met with the wrecking crews that reduced these Victorian mansions to rubble. The image of these faded mansions, whether in Bunker Hill or Baltimore, conjured up the feeling of dread and the uncanny. But architecture alone isn't inherently scary. It could be argued that what makes these houses haunting is how their excessive style collides with time and neglect. Their layered ornament, once a symbol of optimism, decays spectacularly. The architect Witold Rimczynski put it best by saying, quote, "We are never indifferent to buildings. We respond to them instinctively, as we do to faces. Victorian homes had expressive faces, and when those faces sagged, cracked, and rotted, they came to look troubled, even threatening." And this isn't necessarily simply for Victorian houses. It's possible that the archetype of the haunted house will evolve over time, and it's very possible that in the future we'll see more traditional suburban homes as the new image of the haunted house, like those seen in Poltergeist. For now, Victorian homes still represent the thin line between beauty and dread, haunted not by ghosts, but by the dark corners of our own imagination.